All right, welcome everyone to episode 5 of Inner Sanctum.
Yes, and here we are to talk about movies that may be related to the occult,
Yeah, so we wanted to talk about
if
occult
not
movies.
necessarily occult.
Right. But we didn't get to we didn't want to just do movies that are purely about the occult. So I don't have any documentaries on my list. I don't have any films. Many of them have tangential overlap with the occult, I think we'll find, but some of them are movies that I think people would not immediately say are occult movies.
Okay, I think I did the same. And
Okay.
Dan and I picked potentially different movies.
Yes. We did not tell each other what movies we selected as our personal top 5.
List.
Cats are not in any distinct order on a level of 5 to 1. Mine are. So we'll start with the number 5 for me is my 5th least favorite occult movie
of your
occult favorites.
Of your 5 occult adjacent list.
Yes. To be clear,
is that coherent?
Yeah, we'll move through this. To be clear, we have not seen Dark Song, which is a film that is getting a lot of acclaim right now in the occult world for its portrayal of occultism and its portrayal of magical systems specifically. I want to see it, but we won't be talking about that today.
I just thought of a movie.
Yeah. We do also have a space for honorable mentions. So we're coming up on the weekend. It is a holiday weekend. Maybe you will be taking your beloved to a film of some kind. Maybe it'll be an occult one. We don't know. But for us, we often watch movies on the weekends. I think we're pretty big film buffs. I think that's our thing. It's
I would
movies and TV.
never describe myself in that way because it seems so fraught.
Right. Yeah.
We enjoy watching movies that we like.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
whether it's movies that are blockbusters to movies that are more art house, small films. We like what we like.
Yeah. And you're going to find out what that is. Since we like what we like, I will also say I did bring tea this time. The tea I am drinking is my favorite tea. This is Mint Magic. And what tea did you bring, Kat?
You gave it to me. Did you give me rose hibiscus?
Rose hibiscus. Yes.
Nice.
Awesome.
All good stuff. Cat Mug Mom is back. Cat Dad. Yet to be seen. Was in the dishwasher. So it was tarot palm reading. Yes, palm reading with tarot correspondences on it. I don't know if it's accurate. I think it's got an extra line.
I don't think it is either.
It's fine.
All right, let's jump in on our film list. Kat, start us off with your number 5.
Ooh, ASMR.
This makes for great radio.
Okay, well, I didn't know we were going 5, so I kind of have one or the other, and which one we talk about is up to you, Dan. But I have Howl's Moving Castle or Spirited Away by Hayao Miyazaki.
That's interesting because one of my potentials was also a Studio Ghibli film. For me, it was Kiki's Delivery Service, and that's an honorable mention for me.
Okay.
So we have a little bit of overlap already. Let's jump in. Why Howl's Moving Castle?
Okay. Because we've already talked about it on Inner Sanctum, which is hilarious. Yes. But I mean, we honestly talk about it not a lot, but more than you would think necessary. I think Calcifer as a character is really interesting. And I guess if you haven't watched Howl's Moving Castle, it is, I believe, a Studio Ghibli film distributed by Disney. Came out in 2004 and then 2005 in English. And it is a fantasy story about witches and sorcerers. And it follows a main character named Sophie, who goes on a journey to find what is valuable about herself in the world and how to relate to others and value herself. And it's a really imaginative story. Of course, it's a Studio Ghibli film, so it's beautiful. And Dan uses one of the songs from this movie.
Yes.
It's not a musical, but one of the themes in the Numinous playlist.
Yeah.
So we love it on many levels, but there's a lot of occult themes, a lot of magic in this movie.
Because we're talking about this movie as well as Spirited Away. I think it's worth talking about because honestly, Studio Ghibli
about compromising and doing a double feature.
Yeah, Studio Ghibli, it's a triple feature because I'm including Kiki's.
Oh my gosh, we're going all in.
The Studio Ghibli stuff has such a good bead on magical systems and spirit systems, and that I think is not necessarily rare in fiction. However, in magical fiction, I think it totally is. So the magic or the spirit relationships in Spirited Away are better in almost every way than almost any cartoon animation feature I can think of that's come out of Western production houses that deal with magic. Because like Disney magic is very much like the fairy godmother has come and with a wave of her wand you become Cinderella. Or DreamWorks is more like, oh, it's fairy tale magic. It's that kind of Western, like we're not treating this as if it's real. Where for Studio Ghibli, even though the pieces are fictional and are placed in a time that never existed, they are, I think, they're a good place to start if you're looking at an operant animistic or animist spirit model. Animistic is the book. An animist perspective on spirit communication.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really like the way the characters interface with each other and treat each other as people, not necessarily humans, but as persons.
Yes.
So like Calcifer being the fire demon or the star spirit. The fire demon or the star spirit. He is fueling and powering the magic of this moving castle, Howl's moving castle. But he's a very vibrant and interesting character. I forget who he's voiced by, but someone very funny.
Yeah.
And in Spirited Away, like there are all these complex relationships and exploration of friendship with these characters who are spirits and who are different types of spirit, and so interface with her in a different way and have levels of friendship,
levels of awareness, and different needs. And I like the, again, very animist, very like the very aware take on just because spirits have needs does not inherently make them evil. So like the spirit that like she's very concerned about, the one that kind of is like a monster in the movie, ultimately is revealed, No Face is ultimately revealed to be part of the process, right? Like part of the natural spirit world. And while certain things may have come out of balance over the course of the film, it's not necessarily like that this is an evil wizard or an evil, entity that's out to do the exorcist, right? Like this is, I think there's something very, very good there in reflection for like the way in which we interact with the world as occult people.
Yes, I also appreciate stories where characters can do harmful and damaging things, but there can be redemption from that, especially as depicted as like spirits.
Yeah.
And spirits, normally you don't interface with them. Like from a materialist perspective, they don't exist. So if they show up and they frighten you or they seem to like harm something in your environment, you say that they are frightening or they're harmful. But if you continue to be in relationship and be aware of this spirit, and this is what I see in Studio Ghibli films, you understand that they are just as complex as human persons, sometimes, for some spirits.
And complex in different ways. So I like that a lot. Like I remember those little like woodland creature. Like they're like Studio Ghibli's spin on like nymphs or elves. They're little white creatures and their heads like kind of click like clocks.
Yeah.
That's not in either or any of the films we just mentioned.
Oh my gosh, what's it in then?
Is that in Princess Mononoke?
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 Yeah, probably.
Those entities are kind of like throughout the film just exist and are kind of seen to be like, in a lesser movie, they would be the cute spin-off animal sidekick. They would be like the porgs from Star Wars or the reindeer from Frozen. But instead, you find towards the end that there is like a interwoven complexity for those entities of their own space that all the other characters don't ever really fully witness or realize.
Yeah.
It's just such a great, it's almost ecological in the way that the spirit world is structured in those films.
The invisible ecosystem, you might say. But it's depicted very well. Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind, really good movies that that personify, again, that word, person, different sacred spaces and mountains and trees and creatures of the forest. Yeah. In a really lovely animist way. Yeah. So that's a big piece of why I like Spirited Away and Howl's Moving Castle. That's a piece of that. Howl's Moving Castle is a little more about little more magic as you might see in a Western context, I would think. You know, there's a talisman that is imprinted on a table that must be removed. That is a curse. And in Spirited Away, there are flying, I think, paper airplane, not something like paper birds that have been enchanted by a witch. So there's lots of really just fun magic depictions. Yeah, yeah. But also there is some, at no point is Howl the wizard, who is kind of the linchpin of the movie insofar as he is the piece on which the entire plot kind of pivots. I like that the film still portrays wizards and by extension occultists. Kiki's Delivery Service does this too with witchcraft, portraying them as powerful entities of their own right, but still being moved around the board by both mundane and spiritual influences. So so like the upcoming war in that movie. Yes. So that kind of binding Howl's action and how he takes part in this conflict that he, for various reasons, must engage in. Yes. But doesn't want to. Which I think is like medicinal for our time. Like, how do we engage in the world? That is always a question as an occultist, I think, that should be forefront, which is how do we engage? Why are we doing what we do? And then recognizing the limitation of this work as well. Like, we are still, just because we're exploring these magical things and just because we can create magical things happening doesn't mean that we know all things or that we are all powerful as much as we'd like to be. Yes, so we can affect change where others would say there's nothing to be done. But there are lots of external forces that do make that difficult sometimes. Yeah. People would say impossible. And that's an interesting piece of being a magician and being a wizard that I enjoy seeing depicted in film that I can relate to. Okay, you're opening your list, so that means number 5. It's time. Number 5 for me is the Mothman Chronicles. Oh my God. So we're going a little bit darker. We just talked about like this interwoven spirit world and a spirit ecology and nuanced takes on magical experience. I really enjoy the Mothman Chronicles. It's not my favorite, but I think it's a really good insight or window into high strangeness and liminality in magic. Yeah. And it's also, while Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, Kiki's Delivery Service have like this kind of open engagement with the spirit world and an understanding that, oh, well, even if these things are happening that aren't perhaps what I would will, they still are not, by their definition, malevolent. Mothman kind of handles that in a similar way, but for Mothman, it really is sometimes bad shit happens magically, and we do not know why, and we might never know. And I love that kind of encounter with the entirely
Alien.
Yes. So Mothman's is that a horror or a thriller?
I would
Suspense.
So it's based on a book, actually, the Mothman Chronicles, which was an investigative, like, research report on the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, Virginia.
Nonfiction.
Nonfiction. The movie is a fictionalized kind of spin on all of that documentation, although many of the key events are still featured in the film. I would call it a horror film.
Okay.
I used to think it was more of a thriller, and it's presented as a thriller. There's no like body slasher horror disfigurement that you might see in a straight up horror movie. And there isn't anything that is beyond the like, there isn't, even though it's called the Mothman Chronicles, there isn't like a good shot of the Mothman creature. Like, here it is. And I love that because it is so horrific.
That's really not necessary for like a good horror film.
A lesser movie probably would have had like the Mothman pop out at the end, you know?
I mean, it depends. It depends. Like in The Ritual, they had the actual monster pop out at the end and make a rune. But I did remember watching the Mothman with you and seeing that kind of flash of, you know, the outline or the impression of what Mothman was. And I find that was far scarier than seeing it. And of course, the depictions later by some of the characters was very, very frightening and angelic. And really interesting. Like it definitely looks like how you might draw an angel. Yeah,
Mothman as a like entity or as an idea, as a pop culture piece, is very much in cryptid territory. So there are a lot of like paranormal researchers who think Mothman is a cryptid of some kind.
Right, there's a statue.
Yes, there is a statue with a very shiny butt. I am very much of the opinion that Mothman is not a cryptid. Mothman is probably a symptom of a greater issue of high strangeness and paranormal phenomenon within a community. I don't think it was there to warn people about, spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, it's like 20 years old. I don't think that it was there to warn people about a bridge collapse. That to me seems very retroactive materialist thinking, like, oh, well, what if it was here, it had something to tell us. I sometimes think that paranormal phenomena has nothing to tell us. Sometimes it is something that is happening removed from us, and it's just entered into our ecosystem.
That's
to borrow
true.
That framework.
Yes, I did read that making meaning out of extraordinary experiences or supernatural encounters can really help people in seeing it in a healthy way and positive way. Because if you are confronted by something that is highly strange and you have no way to interpret it, it can be extremely uncomfortable and make it be a negative experience for you.
Yes, and there's really no way to like come to terms with the fact that real people engaged with some pretty terrifying stuff with the Mothman Chronicles. One of the reasons I recommend it and why I like it enough to put on this list is that the perspective is entirely from a materialist, like 1990s philosophy of we've solved history, we've figured it all out. This is the end of history, and it's just going to kind of be American exceptionalism moving forward. And so all of the kind of investigative research that's being done from the main character's perspective is, I mean, in the film, he's a Washington Post reporter, which today would make total sense. Like watching the film is like reading the New York Times covering UFO phenomena. It shows how poor of a match materialism is for encountering the extraterrestrial. And I don't mean that as alien. I mean that as just beyond the terrestrial. I like it for that reason. And I like just how weird it is.
Yeah. I mean, and if you go further, it could be entirely terrestrial, like a product of Earth itself.
Sure.
So there are many ways to frame and look at this, but the materialist way is not the most useful.
And that's the thing that keeps coming up through the film. Like
it's problematic in the real sense of it creates problems of this can only be seen or viewed in so far as this person must have a delusion or be delusional.
Yes, there's an entire sequence where
there's a mechanistic explanation.
Right, where the main character has a conversation with one of the individuals who has seen and interacted with this Mothman creature. And he recalls that his wife also saw it and was sketching it, but she had a non-operable brain tumor, and that eventually killed her. Brain tumor, which is extremely rare and can cause these types of like hallucinations. And so he immediately dismisses this guy's account, or at the very least moves him towards seeing someone like, you know, a neurosurgeon or
psychiatrist,
a neuropsychiatrist, a psychiatrist, yes, but with like specifically with a focus on, you have this exceedingly rare brain tumor. And then they go to the hospital and they do imaging, and they're like, no, actually you're totally fine. And the guy who has been seeing these things breaks down in that scene and is like, well, what the fuck? Like I've done, you know, I'm seeing this stuff. No one can tell me why. So I was taking solace in the fact that maybe I was crazy, and maybe this was just, you know, my brain being aberrant. And then finding out that no, actually your brain's functioning just great. You are seeing these things.
Yeah.
Not only does it like totally unmoor the witness, that also is a crucial piece of pushing forward the main character and like really investigating what's happening.
Yes. And if I recall, the whole movie is rather disorienting.
Yeah.
Like you can follow it pretty easily. Well, very easily. But each scene, it seems stranger than the next, and you're not sure what the heck is supposed to be happening.
Yes.
Even as a viewer, it's all intentional, but I think it's
pure high strangeness.
Yeah.
So what's your fourth
high strangeness film? Is the Mothman Chronicles. My fourth film is Arrival.
Ooh.
By Denis Villeneuve, released in 2016, starring Amy Adams. It is a sci-fi thriller about humans' first, I guess, encounter. Was it first even?
Yeah, first encounter.
Encounter with extraterrestrials, aliens, and the film is about language and linguistics as a way of moving through and seeing the world. So there is an aspect of time travel. There's an aspect of teaching from the aliens to the humans, so that there can be future aid from the humans. So there's a lot of like doing things because in the future it will be better.
Yeah.
It's time travel in multiple ways.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I love that you chose this because this is actually number 2 on my list, Arrival. Arrival is great, and I love it most because it's not about time travel in the way that like, oh, we get in the TARDIS and we travel through time.
Yeah.
Or a black hole opened up and there's singularity. Instead, it is your language affects the way that you perceive time and affects the way then that you interact with it. Yes. So it's very much a magical occult film insofar as the language component. Yeah, these like entities, which look suitably alien, almost Lovecraftian.
They do, yeah.
Communicate in this like sigil language, which then this linguist has to uncode, and the whole portion of the film is struggling to decode this sigil language.
Yes.
Ultimately finding that their language was not decodable because they were viewing it through a linear time frame. And as soon as she makes the transition to, oh God, we're out of time, like literally outside of time when we're working with these things, that then changes her ability to interface with the world.
Yes, and enlarges her ability to move through time as a method of awareness and use of language.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting exploration of how we are conscious of language and how we are conscious. So that's, you know, it's a really good film as well. It keeps you kind of on the edge of your seat because you're not sure how the humans are going to continue this relationship with something that's so wholly other.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fear on the humans' part. And like, how can we make sure that they're not going to hurt us when we don't really know what they're saying and why they're here, and just encounter with the unknown. that is so public. In the film, it's like
Yeah.
this ship comes down and it is very large and very visible. So
Yeah.
they cannot control, governments in different parts of the world cannot control that information from leaking out to the public.
Right. And the government feature in the film is very much like, oh, we want to protect ourselves, but also we're here for like, think about their technology. And there are so many conversations about like this alien technology. And in the end, she decodes their language and they leave. And the technology that they leave, that they give humanity, is not a spacecraft or an atom bomb or something that like, you know, has a military application. It's literally a new way of being and thinking about your place in the world.
It's the language.
Yeah.
Something else that honestly makes this film hard for me to actually watch and sit down and watch, because I do cry a lot when I watch it.
It's an emotional one.
Something I want to talk about with you is the implications around divination and knowing what's going to happen.
Yes.
And how that changes your behavior
Mm-hmm.
and whether it does. Because sometimes, and as the movie explores, sometimes knowing that something bad is going to happen won't keep you from making that choice.
Right.
Because there's good along the way,
Mm-hmm.
or because you have to live it yourself.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I like that a lot. I like the emotional component of the film. Like, there would be a lesser movie that would just be like Contact, if you remember that movie, where it's about like aliens talking to a priest and a scientist.
Oh, I do like that.
Michael Crichton movie, I think.
I like that one too.
It's fine. I like Arrival a lot more because Arrival, I think,
it's on another level.
Has a really, the main character's daughter throughout the film. Well, we don't know this until the film is non-structured. It's non-linear, but the main character's daughter is very ill and is going to pass away, and that's part of like the mother's mission in communicating with these beings too, is like that idea of technology. Never that's explicitly stated like, oh, they can heal my kid, but there's that consistent idea of like, what new miracles, what new technology do these things have? And then the full and total awareness of the film to be like, nope, that child is still going to die. And Amy Adams' character knows that.
Yeah, and there's that line where they explore the idea of a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. And that kind of way of looking at choices and actions, and how it interfaces with language is very fun to explore, and it's a very well told and complete story, despite the fact that our understanding of this is so incomplete. Yes,
I think if you're interested at all in the idea of time magic, specifically within like a chaos magic lens, Arrival is an amazing film to watch, because it'll give you some really good ideas about both, as you said, divination and what we can know about the past, present, and future, but also then like intent in magic, because we can get outside of time. Like, that is a magical model of thinking, of recognizing that time is not linear. It's a very cool exploration of that.
Yeah.
That's your number 4, right? And my number 2.
So it is your turn.
It is my turn. My number 4 is Cloud Atlas, which we talked about just a momentary like fragment last week. But this week I did want to share kind of, I like that we talked about Arrival first, because Cloud Atlas is another movie that deals with nonlinear time progression, but where Arrival is focused on language and the way in which our literally perception and the way we talk about perception impacts our ability to perceive. Cloud Atlas is, of course, about reincarnation and multiple lives and the mission of the soul through multiple lives and what it is trying to obtain. An occult film in that way, because I think it handles reincarnation very well. I haven't seen a ton of movies that do reincarnation, but the few that I have seen that have like a reincarnated plot point is very much like oh, I suddenly remembered valuable information from my past life, and that's going to help progress the plot forward. This is, or it's a very like, oh, I'm reincarnated, and everyone in the script is like, yeah, okay, you can believe that, but like, we're not taking that as a serious plot development within the film.
Yeah, I mean,
Cloud Atlas doesn't do that.
Yeah, reincarnation is one of those things, like, how do you really do anything with it unless your whole movie is going to be about that?
Well,
like kind of like Cloud Atlas, which I
right.
probably wouldn't have even imagined had I not watched Cloud Atlas.
Right. I mean, the West does reincarnation in a kind of, well, in a very like monotheist Christian way. So the thing that would be a good counterpoint to me is we just watched Last Night in Soho. And Last Night in Soho is a horror thriller about a woman who is moving through time to the 60s versus the present day, and is uncovering spirit communication and spirit messages that have relevance in the present day. And that's kind of like the Western spirit model, right? Is like we die and maybe we get trapped in the floor where our bodies are buried, or maybe we go to some kind of afterlife, or maybe we just compartmentalize the past person and say, I'm a new person now. And that's often, I think, how that kind of reincarnation twist is handled. It's like, oh, the little old lady you never suspected. Turns out she's the murderer, or something like that.
My God.
Yeah. Spoilers for Last Night in Soho.
I did not know you were gonna drop that.
I think it's a very difficult thing to handle in the West because Westerners generally have a very poor understanding of karma and an extremely poor understanding of reincarnation. For most Westerners, it's just like, oh, I die, and if I was good, I get to be a different person, and if I was bad, I become a bug.
Ugh, I probably have an extremely poor
sure
version of reincarnation, but I did learn most of it from Adventure Time.
Which should have made Adventure Time should have been on this movie list just on its own.
There's a TV show one that we need to do.
Honorable mentions.
House on the Haunted Hill.
Yes.
The Netflix series.
Yes.
And okay, there's another piece of this, but for now we're sticking
Cloud Atlas.
Cloud Atlas. Yeah, I think I always enjoy watching this one. It is like a little bit more complex and difficult to follow for a number of reasons.
But it's rewarding.
They explore language as well and how that would look different and evolve over many years.
Yes, I do agree with that. I like that a lot. Yeah.
But it is a very compelling story about what matters for humanity as a whole. There's the individual story of self-actualization and reaching to the point that we can our highest selves. And then there's, but also there's this greater narrative that is woven across these many lives. And what is this greater narrative? Is it as civilization as a whole, whatever that means? Humanity, all living things as a whole are reaching their own self-actualization or point of highest selves, perhaps. But how to do that and interface with people and entities, whether intentional or not, that don't seem to want that and that actively work against something like that. Cooperation. I think the biggest theme there is the connection.
Yes, it's the connection, and it's the way in which the embodiment of the soul, if we're using like that really just mind-body divide, the embodiment of the soul, the mission remains the same, but the choices that are being made are different because you're ensouled into a new being. Like, again, as a point of comparison, the Tom Cruise movie Live, Die, Repeat, where he gets killed by aliens and comes back until he can do it right. That's again a very Western idea of like life after death. Like, oh, I have unfinished business, and so my soul must finish that business before it goes on to heaven, purgatory, whatever. That is not.
Well, that's not really.
No, it's not. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, this is what Cloud Atlas gets, I think, very, very right, is that yes, you can see like the characters through their multiple incarnations, but because they incarnate, they sometimes make decisions or live lives that are opposed to their greater objective. But that's because they are incarnated into a new body that has new experiences and that
new environments,
new environments and situations, right? It's that question of like, if I'm an internal consciousness, why don't I remember anything before I was 5 years old, right? Like, why do I have no other memories? And you can do like magical working, like past life regressions or journeying or astral travel or whatever.
Right.
But for the average person, I think it gets very difficult to wrap your brain around, well, if I have a mission, if my soul has some kind of objective that it must complete over the course of millions of incarnations, what is that? And am I even working towards it right now? You know?
And you just reminded me of the Midnight Gospel episode that explores reincarnation. I can't remember what the title of that episode is, but if you explore it, I'm sure you'll find it. I think it's a really good discussion and depiction of reincarnation as well.
Yes, definitely. And there's even some good like stuff in Cloud Atlas about like artificial intelligences as well. There's some interesting plot threads there about like, well, what does it mean to even be human or to be ensouled? Those are interesting questions that the movie raises.
Another movie that makes me weep.
Yes.
That I am sad about. It's my turn.
It is your turn. Number 3. Number 3 for Kat.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Do you have any guesses?
Annihilation.
I know.
Oh.
The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, okay. Yes, occult movie all the way.
1939.
Yes.
Based on a book written by Frank Baum, who was a theosophist who incorporated some of those ideas into The Wizard of Oz, the book. And I recently found just today he has 13 books.
Yes.
Oz. I didn't know about that.
They are apparently quite good, although a little dated. They read like pulp now, apparently, but they are pretty good from what I've read.
Yeah, I mean, I would give it a shot. But I was thinking like, okay, what are movies that I really enjoy that have occult themes? And then this just popped into my head because we've talked about it before. There are lots of symbolic and storytelling aspects to this movie that do reflect in occult philosophy.
Oh yes, spiritualism and theosophy are probably the two biggest like pieces of the Wizard of Oz story. Of course, you have the witches, the good witch, the bad witch.
There is a good witch, which is nice, which is you have to appreciate it while it's here.
She came down in a bubble, man.
Dan is referencing a meme.
Yes, there is a meme where someone is arguing with their brother, or I assume their brother, arguing with someone about whether or not Glenda is the good witch or a princess. It's excellent, but beside the point. There's some really good stuff in The Wizard of Oz.
She does seem like a princess also.
Yes. I also really like the wizard in A Wizard of Oz because he is so... Yes.
A little bit.
The wizard is so emblematic of like a shamanistic or magic, like stage magic trickery that still functions as wizardry. There's a really great piece at the end where he gives all of the characters something to represent their journey, what they've obtained by going down the yellow brick road and fighting the witch. For the Tin Man, it's a heart. For the lion, it's courage. And I always view that sequence now, having read a lot of magical work, as a very, very good reflection of magical work. Like the wizard cannot give the lion courage. And in the same way that I, as a wizard, cannot, hand my clients or my, the people I work with, I can't just hand them a perfectly packaged like update that's like, now you have courage, just restart your operating system. Instead, there's that psychomagic approach of, oh, well, here's something that symbolizes courage, and I'm giving it to you after you've built courage naturally by going through things that terrify you. You are now courageous. You are now someone who has a heart, you now have a brain.
Yeah.
And a lot of people look at the wizard and they're like, oh, well, he's the bad guy, or he's leading them on, or he's an asshole.
It does seem that way because he has this wonderful green fog and this fake face that makes him
very shamanistic, very
frightening,
ceremonial magic,
magnificent. And then they just walk over to the corner and they literally pull back the curtain, which is what a phrase.
Short, fat little guy. Yeah.
Ran behind the curtain.
Right. He's not a floating ripped head. Like, I've never seen a head that's ripped, but if you watch The Wizard of Oz, that guy's head is like veiny and just like he lifts, bro. That head lifts. I do really like it. And it reminds me not of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films and the portrayal of Gandalf there, but the Wizard of Oz, the wizard, reminds me of Gandalf as I read about him in The Hobbit. Very much like, a trickster entity in many ways. Like the wisdom that's
count on him. He's like elves, always speaking in riddles.
Yeah, Gandalf, especially in The Hobbit, because Tolkien hadn't quite figured out who Gandalf was yet. He's like, oh yeah, you have to go on this perilous quest and you have to figure it out. And by the way, I'm going to yeet out of here while you do all the hard work because I have to go talk to the elves about something.
Yes. And before people get mad at us, Dan is paraphrasing Tolkien when he says that he hadn't quite figured out Gandalf.
Yes, this is
not a criticism.
Your issue is with Tolkien, not with me. And I think that's obvious. If you read the Silmarillion and you read the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf functions differently in those stories and he presents himself differently than he does in The Hobbit. And that's fine because The Hobbit is a different conversation.
It's not in the Silmarillion, is he?
No, but his whatever they're referred to as the essentially angel beings, the wizards are.
My nerd knowledge is failing me here.
He's whoever he becomes as Gandalf, whoever he was previously, that's mentioned. But regardless, moving forward.
So not quite Howl from Howl's Moving Castle as a wizard, but the Wizard of Oz wizard does have a kind of a helpful piece at the end.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
I don't know if we can expect him to have planned that whole thing based on his reaction with the curtain thing, but maybe.
No, and I think really if we look at this as a meta like commentary on the film, knowing like Baum's spiritual inclinations towards theosophy and towards spiritualism, I think it is important to remember in the beginning of the film, there's the framing with Dorothy going and meeting the wizard when it's in black and white. And he is in a circus wagon with a crystal ball, and he's like a circus performer. And what I haven't read what Baum's interpretation of this is, but my interpretation of that is Baum's defense of spiritualism. Because around the time The Wizard of Oz is coming out, spiritualism is getting hit over the head by people like Houdini. And people are saying, this is all fake. Like, this is nonsense. These people are all hucksters.
This is like turn of the century.
Yes.
Time.
And he is presented as both the Wizard of Oz proper, but also the Carnival Barker wizard as being a huckster. Like, he's presented as, yes, I'm not really going to be able to call down lightning bolts. I'm not really going to be able to, lift this whole city with my jacked head. Instead, it is, no, look beyond just the trappings of the trickster for the actual medicinal value of the wizard. And to me, that's very psychomagic, very shamanic.
Yeah, and there's levels of consciousness and awareness that Baum would definitely be referencing there.
Yes.
And also, as I looked him up just for this conversation, he also believed in reincarnation.
Yes.
So that theme as well.
Which again, you see in Dorothy's quote unquote dream state in the movies.
And you were there.
And you were there and you were there.
But then it's like, oh, I love that it's framed in a dream too. And it's positive in a way, not like a, end of the Enterprise Star Trek way.
Right. Like, it was all just Riker having a experience on the holodeck.
And then that there's this extreme weather event, which honestly is something that happens in my dreams a lot and I really like. So there's a lot there.
It also, I think if you were to free this from fiction, And if someone were to explain the quote unquote dream state experience of going to Oz and all of these things, again, because of Baum's background in theosophy and in spiritualism, it is the dream state is the astral. So there's not really
fully color.
It's the full color. It's the right. It is, oh, we're now in a space that is just beyond human experience. Yes, it's a way to show off Technicolor, film innovation, but it also, I think, is a thing that points to the reality of dreams, the reality of the astral, and the more than human world as being truly a more than human world.
Yes, and maybe the truth is more vivid in the dream world than reality. Yes. Yeah, lots of fun things to explore there in that quite old maybe.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'm glad you dipped in for an old one, because most of mine are skewing a little bit more recent, mostly because I find more recent films, even if they're not occult, seem to have better ideas about the occult than like 70s and 80s horror films that are about the occult. So you won't hear us referencing any like Wicker Man, at least not me. Wicker Man or
about the Wicker Man.
Then
which one?
I know,
which
right?
Version?
The good one, not the Nick Cage one.
The Nick Cage one cracks me up.
Yeah. My third option, because your third was Wizard of Oz, right? My third is Prometheus, which I love.
Now, I thought about that one, but I didn't think what would make that kind of occult adjacent?
Well, Prometheus is definitely, obviously, for those of you who are unaware, it's part of Ridley Scott's return to his Alien universe, which he created with the 1970 movie Alien. This is a prequel to that, and it features a group of scientists, researchers, and business people traveling deep in space to find answers to who created life. And can, again, their technology save us? Because we find...
Went from the caves to the stars.
Right. We find the big twist is that the owner...
You're just giving away every...
This movie is so old, I don't even care. The big twist, for those of you who haven't seen it and do not care about seeing it, the owner of the corporation that is littered throughout all of the Alien movies, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. Yeah.
Pulled right out of the nerd.
Yeah, right out of that nerd wallet. He's stowed away on the ship, and he is only interested in communicating with the aliens so they can give him eternal life, or at least prolong his life and keep him from dying. The reason I chose it as an occult movie is because it deals heavily with origins, humanity's origins. It's very much an ancient alien story.
It's myth.
Yes, and it's an ancient alien story that is not like a bad Discovery or History Channel ancient alien story. It's not, oh, we have a the aliens came here and helped us build the pyramids. This is, no, the aliens came here and created DNA. And that's why we exist today.
Or didn't come there exactly.
Right. No, in the very beginning of the film, they're on Earth. Yeah.
I didn't know
that is very much a story that I think has a lot of significance to sit with, to think about. If you're interested in ideas of like panspermia and the mycelial network, that shows up with the black goo that everyone drinks is very fungal and has fungal properties.
Like it's fluid, but it behaves in a like more intentional way.
Right. And then even the revelations later in the film that, humanity was created by accident, and that what was actually happening was, these engineers, these beings that have been discovered were just trying to create a weapon, and the weapon killed all of them. That kind of stuff is very Gnostic. And so it has these heavy, like Gnostic pieces to it, which I deeply enjoy. We have this idea of like the demiurge creating. And then ultimately, although I think the sequel, Alien Covenant, totally undoes it, the finale with the main researcher, Dr. Shaw, and David, the robot, both now contemplating their origin. and trying to figure out where they go next and
Yeah.
what happens next.
What happens after you learn that you were an accident and that your creator hates you?
Yes.
Essentially, in this
storyline, because it's not the true creator of life or the true creator of a planet or anything.
Created them,
right? And that's literally what the movie ends with.
That's
is Dr. Shaw saying, David, the android, says something to the effect of, well, what do we go? Where do we go from here? Like all these beings are dead. And Dr. Shaw's response is, well, who created them? I think that it's a really...
That's like the Mitch Horowitz quote. Only the question is indestructible. Only the question, yeah. Keeps you going.
It's a movie that, and I hate to play this card because I feel like it's so unfair, but I'm going to do it. I really think this movie was dismissed when it came out because it wasn't what people were hoping to get, which was another alien movie. They wanted a horror movie in space with like one alien chasing people down dimly lit corridors.
That happened, basically.
It does, but not enough for some people. And I honestly think it was too smart for some people. Like it goes over, unless you're interested in Gnosticism and interested in ancient aliens and interested in like entheogens, which Ridley Scott seems to be very interested in based off of his film work. This movie doesn't have a lot for you if you're looking for body horror and alien stuff. Like you get the impression watching it that Ridley Scott had a movie to make about the engineers, and some studio exec was like, you got to put an alien in this, man. Like, where's the blood and guts? And so there's like 2 or 3 scenes that are like, oh, we're doing body horror again. But it's not, I think it was unfairly dismissed for those reasons.
Yeah, there is one piece that is, I'm just recalling this, but it's very interesting, where Dr. Shaw has to use a machine that is only built for
men,
Wayland, men, and she has to use it for
an abortion.
Yeah, and which we've said. Yes, which is very very interesting at the least.
Yeah, there's a lot of like
but she has to do that. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Like I'm just remembering like how everyone pushed back on her and wanted her to be this vessel.
That's
this creature.
One of like the best reads on the movie is like this very feminist one of like Dr. Shaw gets the alien transmitted to her sexually from her partner.
Yes.
And she is unaware that the alien is within her. So in many ways, this is kind of a non-consensual rape situation. And watching the crew and her boss and these people in power who have no interest in her outside of the alien that you're carrying in you is useful for bioweapon development, has like obvious feminist read correlations to like Roe v. Wade and bodily autonomy and all those things. So it's a dark movie. It has a lot of, things that need to be discussed, and it seems prescient today, given that it came out some time ago. I think it would be a movie that would fare better on release today, because it just seems like the cultural climate is more aware of the concepts that the movie's dealing in.
No idea, to be honest. I have no idea.
One can
hope. Yeah, you really made a good case for that movie, and I want to let it go, but I have to say, being that it's Prometheus, anything related to the devil there?
Oh yes, certainly.
That myth,
right? Yeah, absolutely.
So, like the idea of what is creation? Is it moral at every time? What is technology? Is technology good?
Yeah.
And does it bring good things? Because DNA, I guess, is the technology here.
Yes.
The
and
fire.
That idea of David as Lucifer is something that's built out, or the devil is something that's built out in the sequel, Alien Covenant. Unfortunately, the sequel is very bad. So that minor good piece of like a Luciferian David and like an examination of the role the devil plays in like mythic creation, it's kind of not worth your time to watch that other film.
So the other stuff though in Prometheus.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yes. Okay. We recommend. Very scary though.
Yes, but hard recommend for sure.
All right, it's my turn.
Yes, we're at number 2.
Number 2 is The Witch.
Okay, awesome. The Witch is on the list.
Robert Eggers, director, 2015 film.
Nice.
This is set in what, 1600s United States
16, no,
or later?
it's a little later. It might be 1600s. It's not 1500s because the colonies weren't here yet, but it's a Puritan colony of Puritans who cut off one of their own families and send them into exile for heresy.
Yeah, I think the idea, my interpretation was that they wanted the community to be more strict. And the community didn't want to adhere to that, so he left, basically. And took his whole family and moved to this even more remote space on the edge of this wood.
A field by the edge of a wood.
And things happen.
Yes. Witches come in the night, and there are conversations around possession, literally what is it to possess, but also spirit possession. And there are conversations around religious fervor. And what I like about the movie is that it treats so much of like the conversation in America around the witch trials is, oh, it was ergot poisoning. They were eating bad grain and they were having bad LSD trips or bad psilocybin trips. And so now they thought everyone were witches and they killed each other. And that is not really a great read from a historical perspective or from a spirit one. I like that this movie allows for the presence of ergot as a solve for like, what are these people experiencing, but then also does not discount the actual like lived witchcraft of the witches in the woods.
Yeah, it's a proper horror tale about witches as frightening beings, as humans who have undergone a transformation and now are able to do seemingly supernatural things. And we see a lot of the supernatural in this movie, but whereas before we talked about movies exploring, extraordinary experiences with the highly strange, here we see it as enacted by this witch figure that has all the stereotypes and expectations put on her that you might hear in a scary story about witches. Yeah,
culminating then in a meeting not with that witch as a, plot device or a character that has agency over the plot, but culminating instead in a meeting with the devil, the fount of all witchcraft.
Yes.
I really like this movie, and I like the way in which it starts with the horrors of witchcraft, or the horrors of witchcraft as an idea, with the kidnapping of the baby and then turning it into fly ointment, which is disgusting. But then the lengths that film goes to show how the daughter, the main character, is able to find profound power and transformation through witchcraft. I like that.
So most of the movie, she tries to hold on to her virtue.
Yes.
In a variety of ways, while her reputation is constantly called into question because she is coming of age, coming into her sexuality, becoming older, and no longer finding a place in her six-person, seven-person family,
something like that,
needing to go back to the community. So, but having that kind of budding sexuality, women of that age are normally called into kind of question, and I think that's a really interesting piece. Although she is trying to hold on to her goodness and her godliness, because this movie is also very centered around religion and their practice of it. In the end, ultimately, she has no choice. I mean, she has a choice, but I think it's death, or facing the destruction of her life and her family, or embracing this power that pursued her. It really did pursue her.
And that's the thing that I think is really, that I enjoy about it, is that it does present this choice. And I think it's the film as the witch as a film is a really good piece of apologetics for the devil, because
I expected you to say that.
That choice is presented like to her literally within the film. Like, you can take responsibility for the fact that your whole family was.
Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
And the choice that's being offered, the devil clearly points out, is a non-choice. you can die a martyr and preserve your, your virtue and your holiness.
To what end?
But to what end? And to a God that demands that you be killed for your, for something that you didn't even do anyway, to satisfy some kind of bloodlust. Or you can live deliciously and experience all of this, power, freedom, the kind of narratives that are generally associated with Luciferian ideology. So I really like that, because it does call into question, like, look, and you can live a good life, or you can continue holding on to your goodness that no one believes in, and that is kind of a front at this point. Not that you ever did anything bad, but you're being judged by this structure that says you're bad, even though you aren't. So what's the point?
Yeah, there was a lot of that, of the constant them trying to be good enough, but the teachings of the family about their God and their religion was very, you are bad no matter what. You are always failing God. And it seems like every choice they make, there was no good one.
Yeah.
So they're trapped in this constant shame and guilt. And in the kind of signing of the Devil's Book at the end, she's
asserting control over her life.
Yeah, but she goes beyond shame and guilt. Like it's beyond that. And I do appreciate we get to see what happens after she signs the Devil's Book, and we see her in this ecstatic state in true meaning of the word, which is not necessarily happy, not necessarily just joyful, but this like very emotional, like perhaps quite sad, perhaps quite elevated, just very elevated. So, and she rises with the other witches. So yeah, it's very scary. So if you're not a fan of horror, maybe skip this one or watch like a few scenes somewhere. But
somewhere where you're watching this right now.
Read in conjunction, right? Exactly, somewhere. Watching that in conjunction with reading Stacy Schiff's book. Oh my gosh. The Witches?
The Witches, or
Witches?
Stacy, if you look up Stacy Schiff Witch, you'll find the book.
She has a really interesting historical take on the Massachusetts witches and witch trials. And I read that beginning of the book last October and was impressed by the way she painted the landscape, as it was darkest dark. There was no city lights. There weren't even that many candles that you would utilize at night. It was just you and this untamed, unfamiliar landscape. And that is it can be truly terrifying, can be a true terror. And this is where this aligns with the archetype of the dangerous or frightening or bad witch.
And truly terrifying for specifically Europeans. The native peoples who were like populating the land when the Puritans showed up were not terrified of the dark and terrified of the wilderness, because they didn't see it as unclaimed wilderness. Like, there were ways to move through the world that were respectful of potentially dangerous, mundane, or spiritual spaces. But the Puritans, I think, in this movie really shows, the colonies and the Puritans,
from that perspective,
have a deep, mistrust of the land, because the land is, earthly and therefore evil. Well, these individuals are never presented in the film as Calvinists, but they are certainly Calvinists.
The land must be tamed.
Right. It must be forced to submit.
Yeah. And that is a piece of religious teaching as well.
Yeah. So you have your number one choice. What was your number one choice? Just make sure I'm right on this.
What? Did you see it?
Yeah, I accidentally saw it over your shoulder. What's your number one choice?
Annihilation.
Okay. So my number two choice was Arrival. I'll go up to my number one choice, which is Excalibur, and then we'll talk about Annihilation.
Okay.
But for me, Excalibur is an excellent occult film.
That's an old one.
Yes, John Borman's 1980s film Excalibur. starring a host of really great British stage actors, including, I think at this point, he's still pre-Next Generation Patrick Stewart as one of the main characters in the film. I love this movie. And I had thought, yes, I had thought about putting Green Knight here.
Okay.
But I realized that while Green Knight does have some excellent Arthurian mythology baked into it, Excalibur is Green Knight is a better movie about death and meditating on death and what could death be, which is an interesting idea. But I think Excalibur really knocks out of the park the witchcraft, magic, mythic senses of like meaning making in the world.
It's very mythic.
It's very mythic. It follows King Arthur from being a young boy who pulls the sword from the stone. Well, actually, it follows his father first, conquering, so Uther Pendragon, conquering his enemies, and then a young Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, going through that whole Arthurian legend of meeting, Lancelot, the quest for the Holy Grail, and then finally his death at the hands of his son, Mordred.
Again, spoilers for
spoilers
as old as time.
Yeah, spoilers for something that's come out of the Middle Ages, but it's a great movie. And it really, there are some poignant pieces, particularly for me, where Merlin is talking to Morgana and they're seeing the influx of Christianity and how Arthur has to be a Christian king. And Merlin says something to the effect of, like, our time is ending, their time is beginning, but we're going, because Merlin lives backwards through time, he also knows that they will return to prominence in some way.
Merlin's like Benjamin Button.
Yes, I think the phrase is something like, we're but an echo. And I love that, because yes, you could make that argument. Like, magic hasn't stopped. Magic has only continued to develop since the Middle Ages and since prehistory. I mean, magic is a through line for many cultures. But not only are some of those observations good, and the uneasy tension between like the quest for the Holy Grail as both a Christian symbolic object, but also a magical object, like an actual talisman.
Object of power.
Right. And then the mythology of the king and the land, and like what is, I think, a better take on our relationship to the land, or to quote unquote nature, than the witch has, certainly, for different reasons. But then also this idea of like, we are not, I think it does a really good job of showing how even mythic heroes and figures like Arthur, who have a magical sword and a wizard by their side and the most incredible knights in the whole kingdom, is still uniquely mortal, but is also still paying the karmic, responsibilities and the karmic debts of his ancestors. A lot of the issues with his relationship to his own son, Mordred, but also why Mordred is there to begin with, is not Arthur's fault. It's Uther's. That I think is really instructive for, and Morgana. How do we live through the world? How do we move through the world when we unfortunately do sometimes have to take on the spiritual responsibilities of our ancestors, or pay for their missteps in some way? And I think in this moment, that's a helpful thing. As we kind of negotiate the end of Western power, which is also a really interesting theme in also Excalibur. Spoilers. Yes. Because Excalibur ends with the death of a king, but before that, the king is Arthur's severely weakened. The Grail is no longer within his grasp. Camelot has fallen, and it's not even Arthur who discovers the Grail. It's one of his knights. It's Percival, I think. So there's this kind of incredible layered meaning of, what are we? All kingdoms must end, and all powers must end. What do we do towards the end of that, and how do we live a life of virtue, I guess, within the framework of a very chivalrous definition of virtue. The movie is not without its faults, but it remains one of my favorites. You do not like
That's good.
Excalibur, at least as far as I know.
It's a bit long.
It's an epic.
It is an epic. It is a little older, which
Mhm.
I don't mind, but it's kind of like a theater performance.
Yes, everyone is speaking to the back of the theater. You
Yes.
can tell they just hauled Patrick Stewart off of the West End because he is
From
enunciating to the back row, and it's like we clearly don't know how boom mics work, but it still is a
I'm sure it's a wonderful movie that I've watched pieces of.
yeah.
But
I
cannot
will
get it.
say I don't know how good it would be, and this might be me just defending like something that is quirky, but to me, I don't know how you can do a King Arthur story and not have the preposterous dialogue of like a Shakespearean theater company doing, these massive set pieces. Like, because it's mythic, I almost feel like it couldn't be done as well for what John Boorman was trying to do within the scope of like a more modernized telling of Arthur.
Yeah.
'Cause-
I just watched Batman versus Superman.
Yes, which if you've read our Substack, that's a great viewing experience to do Excalibur and then do Batman versus Superman. Zack Snyder plays with the same themes. Excalibur is one of his favorite films, and he references Excalibur in the opening shot of that movie.
Yes, and if you're looking for the connection because you know the Arthurian myth and you've seen Batman versus Superman, the sword is represented by that kryptonite spear.
Yes.
And so you might make the connection there.
Yes. And the lady in the water is Lois Lane. Okay.
Okay.
So now that we got my number one out of the way, let's dive into your number one, which almost made my list. It's an honorable mention, Annihilation.
Annihilation was directed by Alex Garland released in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite movie, I think, ever.
Okay.
And it is a science fiction, I think, thriller versus horror.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Starring Natalie Portman and a bunch of other great actresses and actor.
This one is such a good movie.
Yes, this one I loved. It's about another one about potential extraterrestrials encounters with something very strange. There's like a piece of time strangeness as well, in that they are losing time at portions. But basically, something called the Shimmer has taken over a piece of Florida.
Yes.
A wilderness kind of area in Florida, and it keeps on advancing. And when people go in the Shimmer, they disappear. They don't come back. And so Natalie Portman and her team, or the team she's a part of, go into the Shimmer to investigate, and strange things happen.
Yes, and it's all about like the ways in which they interact with those strange things. Like every character has a unique reaction to the Shimmer. Maybe fear, maybe acceptance, maybe antagonism, observation. And there are multiple different things the film is like, quote unquote, about. Some of them less occult than others.
Exactly.
However, as a movie about like Lovecraftian contact experiences, and a lot of these movies can be read as contact experiences. Even Excalibur is a contact experience. In that case, with the Lady of the Lake, with the Fae, with the fairy, the magical sword that destines Arthur's life is a piece of magical technology which must be given back to the Lady of the Lake. So there's these ideas of contact experiences need to be zoomed out from like, what's the name of that the Steven Spielberg movie Close Encounters. Not every encounter or contact event is going to be a spaceship playing music at you. Like there is more complexity than that. And this movie, I think, is a brilliant example of the complexity of what is a contact event.
Yes, and the different ways we try to comprehend and make sense of what's happening.
And the way they change us.
So there are many pieces here. One of the major themes is kind of cancer. That's a motif of the movie. That's a theme of the movie, in that something is evolving and changing, and just because it is harmful to you or ending your way of being or ending your life doesn't mean that it is having malicious intent.
Yes.
So that's part of it. I think the more interesting piece of it is the idea of transformation.
Yes, this is a movie that the pieces, like the undergirding philosophy of it, the occult messaging that's very present within it, kind of exceeds the grasp of the director, because unfortunately, in watching the director commentary, his take is very much this mundane kind of, oh, it's about, it's about cancer, which it is, but there are unique moments where the art escapes the creator or the art escapes the artist. And I think this is one where this movie is okay. There you go.
I don't think an artist can fully contain a great piece of work or fully understand what it means in the world. I think sometimes the idea comes out from people and it has its own consciousness and a will to being and an impression on the world. And I'm very interested in an idea like that.
Yes.
I also have to call back to a hermetic principle, as above, so below. So we can talk about cancer while also talking about these bigger concepts, these things that go beyond the human person, but the more than human world and our place in the universe.
Which, spoiler, Natalie Portman's character becomes at the end of the film something more than human.
Yeah, they don't fully tell you that's what happened, but there's little hints. And there is an encounter with a doppelganger as well. So that's a curious concept that you really don't see in many movies, but I always like to see it.
And you would first experience the doppelganger as like, oh, is this something with malicious intent? Is this something truly alien?
Right.
And instead, as you begin to watch them interface together, you realize that no, this doppelganger is like an attempt by whatever this complex ultra-dimensional thing. It is an attempt to understand humanity by becoming it, but in the action of becoming it, it also changes it. And that is
mimicking.
Yes. Yeah. It has some real deep questions to ask about, like, how does the contact event change? And the contact event could be UFO, it could be magical. We've all had magical awakenings of like, oh my God, this is real. And now our lives are different.
Contact with a plant.
Yes, contact with a plant being. The implications of the movie, for me, are more powerful, especially having read the book that the movie is based on. I think that the implications of the movie are way, way more complex than what the film just kind of offers as a standard read of the movie.
Of course, and it does vary significantly from the book. And I do appreciate the book continuing on and finishing that whole arc, that story and exploration in a trilogy. So if you're interested in Annihilation as a movie, but thought there might be something more, there is something more, and it does explore high strangeness in even stranger and more interesting ways.
One of my remembrances from the book that I really liked, that the movie does not discount, but the movie, the implication is that whatever this entity is that's causing the shimmer and that lives in the lighthouse, the entity has come from space. That is the kind of implication of the film.
Yeah, you see it coming from the sky.
Right. But in the books, I might be totally wrong here, but in the books, isn't it the inverse, that whatever is happening, and I've only read the first one, so I don't know what the sequels say, but isn't the implication that it's come out of the earth?
Like literally it does seem to have, but it's not necessarily. So there's a both and.
Which is the perfect occult solution. It's both and, right?
Yes. So one of the mysteries of that book, the climax of the movie is at the lighthouse, arguably, most likely.
Yes.
Not really debatably, actually.
Yeah.
It's at the lighthouse.
Yes.
And in the book, there's this tunnel, but for some reason the main character cannot see it as a tunnel into the earth they must go down into. She can only refer to it and write about it as a tower. So there's this inverse there. There's the going down or is
But again,
going up.
And as above, so below. Like to go down, we go up. To go up, we go down.
It's
like
really
it's very
cool.
Yeah. Annihilation. Another one that people slept on. It didn't get a good release in the US. This was the one that was supposed to be released in theaters and then just got dumped on Netflix and DVD bins. And it was
I think it had
excellent.
a shorter. I think it ended up having a
right. They didn't do a
run.
they didn't do a full promotional like this is in every movie theater.
Yeah.
We're gonna try and do like Blockbuster or something with this.
Yeah.
And it should
really
have been.
Good. And I think
really good.
And to draw back to the title of the movie, the theme is also how we destroy ourselves, our will towards death, and the various ways that we have that calling and we encounter it or we overcome it. Or give into it.
Or just become changed by it. Because that, I think, is the final climax, is the main character doesn't ever... And the framing of this is interviews with her after her experience in the Shimmer, is how this is framed. It's her sitting down with scientists and them asking her what happened in there. And they're telling her and she's kind of remembering pieces of it. But she doesn't, even when she... I love when we first watched it, that you said that the final, like, quote unquote fight between her and like the alien replica thing isn't a fight.
No.
It's a dance.
Yeah, and we watched the special, the feature part on the DVD, and the person playing the doppelganger is a dancer for that purpose.
Yeah, it's a dance, and it's a dance that Natalie Portman's character doesn't understand that she's in a dance.
Yeah.
And that is the part that is like so
that feels real.
Wonderfully occulty. Like, oh, this is happening to me and it feels terrible and I hate it. But it turns out this is actually just me co-creating with the universe. And that process is sometimes a violent dance. And if you're interested in that, Scarlet Imprint's book, Brazen Vessel, has essays about dance and the occult from Alcestis, who is a dancer and occultist.
Fine, I will read it now. Jeez.
So
he's been on me to read those essays, and I will get to it. Do we have honorable mentions?
Yes, one of my honorable mentions was The Witch, which you included on your list.
Yes.
I had mentioned The Green Knight. That's an honorable mention. My only unmentioned honorable mention is Saint Maud.
Saint Maud was also, I just didn't think most people haven't seen that one.
So. Well, and I wanted to save it because next week when Isabel joins us, we asked her to put together a list of occult films too. And I know Saint Maud is on her list. Okay. Saint Maud is a great movie, again, where the message of the film or the intent of it exceeds the grasp of the director.
Indeed. We'll talk about it. The Love Witch.
Yes.
Didn't quite make it, but
understandable. Why not?
Probably should have. I honestly thought you would cover it, so I was like, he's gonna get The Love Witch.
I didn't cover it for a specific reason, which for me is that I think it's a very good movie, and it's a great throwback to like 70s exploitation, and it's a really good feminist piece as far as like understanding women's role in witchcraft. As women are the witch.
And it's like pagan as well.
Yes.
Movies don't traditionally depict witches.
It didn't get into my top 5 because I found that it was a little too... It's intentionally kitschy. It's intentionally doing a 70s thing.
Yeah.
But to me, it felt... It's a movie where the style is... I don't want to say it's style over substance because that is not fair and there's a great deal of substance there, but it's one that the style of it is, I think, sometimes distracting. In the same way that maybe, Kat, you found the stage direction to be distracting in Excalibur.
I found it elevating.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought you were gonna bring up 2010.
Ooh, the year we make contact.
That's a really good one.
That is a good one.
Because it's not just high strangeness extraterrestrials. There's also mediumistic phenomena.
Yes.
In space.
Yes.
So that one.
2010 is very good. Didn't include it because of the ending. I think is a little too pat.
I haven't watched the ending.
Okay, the ending.
So don't tell me.
I think the ending is a little too just so, and it also has. It's a very pat ending. It's just like, oh, and everything's just so.
Okay, all right. I haven't seen it, so go watch that. I'll watch it too.
Great.
The other thing that just occurred to me in our conversation, 2-1's The Lighthouse.
Oh, yes.
Because
very much so.
Tarot stuff.
Definitely.
Lighthouse stuff.
Very
mythic,
good.
Lovecraftian stuff.
Yes.
And Suspiria.
Yeah, Suspiria was also something I wanted to put on my list, but
didn't quite get there.
For me, again, that was an issue with, there's the Giallo Italian version, which is excellent. And then there's the modern version with Tilda Swinton, which is excellent and I think exceeds the original.
Wow.
However, as far as a witchcraft story, I feel like it's more of like more of the same kind of like horror witchy and not occult witchy.
Well, lots of overlap between those.
Sure, definitely.
But I was just thinking the dance component.
Yes.
The vitality of magic, the embodiedness.
If you wanted to watch a good movie on Malefica,
what?
Suspiria is it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the Conjurings also didn't make it.
Conjurings didn't make it because they're unfortunately bad.
Well,
no, I love the first two, and I do have some love in my heart for the Warrens, but the third was a very bad movie. And honestly, the Warrens aren't very good occult figures. They are traditionalist Catholic exorcists. So
paranormal consultants.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see them as, very learned when it comes to the occult. A lot of their occult opinions are very bad, but that's the product of being a trad cath. What can you say? So this has been a lot of fun to talk about occult movies.
Yes, and we have gone on a bit longer than we normally do.
Yeah, who cares?
So next week we are going to have Isabel Rizzo, our co-leader of
School of Occult Arts.
School of Occult Arts and the Numinous Retreat coming up in August. She will be with us to talk about movies again because we talked about it and we're like, let's do it again. Yeah,
she's going to talk about her list, so we'll have a little bit in the beginning to go over her occult films and why they resonate, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the work that she's been doing as a in connecting with Romanian witchcraft and her kind of recent exploration of Romania.
Yes, but when we get to talking with Isabel, you never quite know where the conversation is going to go, but it's always going to go somewhere really interesting.
Yes.
So check in with us next week and Inner Sanctum.
Yes. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy your weekend. Watch some movies.
Yeah.
And if there's something that we missed, put it in the comments below. If there's something that you're like, hey, you need to see this occult film. We did not talk about, as I said, again, we did not talk about like classically occult movies, so like no Jodorowsky on here, like I said, no Dark Circle, but please please let us know what you actually are watching and what it has a good occult take. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.